Good morning. We begin the second week of evidential hearings. As before, anyone in the hearing room may use any electronic device that they have to transmit what they have heard during the course of the evidence being given, provided that they do so after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event that they are describing. The purpose of that is to coincide with the 10-minute delay in the public transmission of the evidence. The devices that you have may not be used for recording what occurs in the hearing room or for taking photographs.
Yes.
Repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Okay,
lovely. Thanks.
Mr. Warrington.
So I'm grateful. Ms. Hudson, good morning. My name is John Warrington, and I'm asking questions on behalf of the inquiry over the course of this morning. Could I begin by asking, what is your full name?
My name is Catherine Jane Hudson.
Now, I think it's right that over the period that we are looking at, so the Tranche 2 period of the 1980s through to the early 1990s, you were a supporter of the campaign for nuclear disarmament. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The campaign is more commonly known as CND, is that right?
That's right.
You've remained involved with the campaign to the present day, is that correct?
I wasn't involved particularly during the 1990s, but from the late 90s I joined CND and became active as a vice chair, then chair, and currently general secretary.
Is it right that you were chair between 2003 and 2010?
That's correct.
And then appointed General Secretary in 2010, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
And you remain the General Secretary?
I am, yes.
You also authored a book about the campaign, is that correct?
I wrote a volume of the CND history in 2005, and a revised, updated version was published in 2018.
And is it right that that book is called CND Now More Than Ever, The Story of a Peace Movement?
The first edition was called that. The second was CND at 60, Britain's Most Enduring Mass Movement.
Thank you. CND is a core participant in this inquiry. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And you have had an opportunity to look at some of the Special Demonstration Squad intelligence reporting about CND and its members, covering a period throughout the 1980s. That's right, isn't it?
That's right.
Now, is it fair to say that you don't have personal knowledge of a lot of the events that you will have read about in the course of that intelligence reporting?
That's correct.
Is it also fair to say that as the current General Secretary and a historian of the movement, you are here essentially, for want of a better expression, as a corporate voice for the campaign for nuclear disarmament?
I'd say I'm representing the CND.
Now, you made a witness statement on behalf of CND, I think dated finally the 2nd of May of this year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That statement consists of 86 pages, is that right?
Yeah.
together with three appendices. Is that right?
Correct.
The first appendix, Appendix 1, is a copy of CND's aims and objectives.
Yes.
Appendix 2, a copy of CND's founding statement. Is that right?
Yes.
And then Appendix 3, a letter dated the 22nd of April 1983, sent by Michael Heseltine, the then Secretary of State for Defence, to Conservative candidates in marginal seats in relation to the 1983 general election. Is that correct?
Yes.
The statement signed by you, is that right?
Yes.
And I think it's correct that two other individuals also contributed to that witness statement.
That's correct.
The first was Roger Spiller, is that right?
That's right.
Mr. Spiller was a member of the National Council of CND from 1980 until 1986, is that correct?
Yes.
He was vice chair from 1982 to 1984.
Yes.
And I think you tell us in your witness statement he was also involved in the East Anglia region of CND during the period of Tranche 2. Is that
Yes.
right? The second contributor is Paul Ostreicher, is that correct?
That's correct.
He was vice chair of the campaign in the 1970s, is that right?
Yes.
A member of the National Council in 1981, is that correct?
Yes.
And vice president from the late 1970s throughout the period of Tranche 2 and up to the present, is that right?
That's correct.
And is it right that he is currently the vice president of
He's
CND?
one of our vice presidents.
Thank you. How many do you have?
Oh, about 6 or 7. Not sure exactly.
Now, they've also both signed the witness statement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And are the contents of that statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Well, thank you, Ms. Hudson. That puts the whole of your witness statement into evidence, and if not already, it will appear on the inquiry's website in due course. Now, I just want to start by asking you a little bit about the beginnings of CND. And I think it's right that it was founded in 1958. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
What was the reason for the foundation of CND?
CND was founded because in 1945 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japanese cities, causing mass destruction, and the radiological impacts of those continued to kill people for decades afterwards. The death toll is a matter of public record. There was obviously great concern about the use of those weapons. And of course, as the Cold War developed and other countries, apart from the United States, got nuclear weapons, a nuclear arms race developed, Britain became part of that, and there was great public concern about the development of nuclear weapons and their potential reuse. There was also great public concern about the impact of nuclear weapons testing, because it was widely practiced. There were hundreds of very, very large-scale nuclear tests carried out in the atmosphere, which were known to have serious public health consequences. So there was a considerable body of public opinion developing against nuclear weapons testing. And so during the 1950s, a number of different organisations began to develop. There was the National Committee Against Nuclear Weapons Testing, which was primarily a women-led organisation, very concerned about the impact of nuclear weapons testing on children and babies, for example. There was also another section of the peace movement, the Direct Action Committee Against Nuclear War, which was concerned to try and stop further use of nuclear weapons and began to highlight nuclear bases and highlight the issues around nuclear weapons use. There was also the Labour Hydrogen Bomb Committee, which developed in the 1950s with Labour parliamentarians, and the development of a mass petition So on many levels across British society, at parliamentary level, at local community level, scientists as well were very concerned, medical professionals were very concerned about the impact. And so a kind of head of concern, I would say, really arose. And in the late 1950s, I think it was in 1957, some very prominent public figures like A.J.P. Taylor, J.B. Priestley and others of that as status in society got together and began to discuss the possibility of creating a mass campaign that everyone could subscribe to. And those discussions continued from in the late 1957, and then in early 1958, in February of 1958, CND was founded around a mass meeting that took place in Westminster Central Hall. There were around about 5,000 people there. And that piece of evidence that you referred to, I think it's our Appendix 2, which is the outline of the policies which CND unveiled at that time, that became the basis of our movement. And as you can see, if you compare that with our current aims and objectives, you can see how much CND has remained true to its original founding principles, which are essentially against British nuclear weapons and also for the global abolition of nuclear weapons. So those two elements have always been there. But I would say that, so in its origins and continuingly, CND is in essence an enormously moral organisation determined to preserve life, to prevent further use of nuclear weapons, and of course to prevent nuclear weapons testing too. So that's how we emerged, and those are the principles and the values on which we were established.
Focusing on the period 1980s through to the early 90s, what were the aims or objectives of CND?
The aims and objectives of CND at that time were, as I say, a continuity of the founding principles. Excuse me. So, as you may be aware, in the late 1970s, there was a decision at a high political level that Trident, the replacement for the Polaris nuclear weapons submarine system, would be introduced into Britain. That had a much upgraded form of nuclear weapons, multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles, so much more precise, but much greater capability. So obviously that was very much within CND's remit to oppose that. So we had a strong campaign on that. But at the same time, we were aware that the United States intended to introduce a new form of missile into Britain and to continental Europe, the cruise and Pershing missiles. So we were very opposed to that. Of course, we were opposed to any kind of nuclear weapons being developed and introduced into Britain. And because of the context of the time, the developing Cold War and the increasingly perhaps confrontational rhetoric that was taking place with President Reagan, Prime Minister Thatcher and others, there was a kind of concern that there would be an escalation towards nuclear war. And I think anyone who was around at that time would remember being in great fear and anxiety about the possibility of nuclear war. And many people believed rightly, I think, that introduction of a new class of weaponry into Europe would increase the risk of nuclear war and would make Western Europe a target and would indeed potentially lead to a situation where a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, as the global superpowers at that time, would be fought within Europe. So people were very frightened. CND was very concerned, wanting to prevent the deployment of these nuclear weapons. And there was great movements, of course, peace movements in Western Europe too, wishing to prevent the sighting of those weapons in their own country. So the anti-cruise missile campaign was a central part of CND's work at that time.
Does it follow from all that you've told us that the campaign was not only against the use or deployment of nuclear weapons, but also their production, development, and as I think, as you've mentioned, testing as well?
Oh, absolutely, very much so. And of course, in that context, it's clear how CND has been very much in line with international law. So as well as being a very moral organisation, we've also an organisation in the framework of international law. So, for example, by that time, in 1970, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty had been ratified, I think in 1970, of which Britain was one of the founding states, and that treaty was committed to the disarmament, non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament, and Britain was signed up to that. And that's always been one of the pillars of our work, to comply with international law. And other elements of international law, following on from the Second World War and the terrors and horrors of the Second World War, also created a situation where the legal use of nuclear weapons would be virtually inconceivable. So international humanitarian law, environmental law, regulations against indiscriminate killing and so on. So CND has always found itself in that framework. And indeed, currently, you talk about those different elements of the nuclear process, so to speak. CND currently supports the new UN treaty, which was ratified in 2021, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which outlaws, under international law, all those different elements of the nuclear weapons production process, including testing and so on. Many countries internationally have now signed up to that treaty, and unfortunately Britain has not yet done so, but it is a core part now of CND's campaigning to ensure that Britain signs up to that latest piece of international law.
Again, just maintaining focus on the 1980s, early 1990s. Was CND's campaigning exclusively directed at nuclear weapons, or did it encompass other weapons of mass destruction?
Yes, we are opposed also to chemical and biological weapons. Of course, the Biological Weapons Convention was ratified in the early 1970s, but the Chemical Weapons Convention was only subsequently ratified. So although for us they're not on the same kind of level, so to speak, as nuclear weapons because of the radiation consequences of nuclear weapons, nevertheless we were and are opposed to all forms of weapons of mass destruction.
At its height, how big did the campaign get during the 80s through to the early 90s? What sort of figures did the campaign reach in terms of its membership?
It was a kind of campaign's dream period, I suppose. We went from just a few thousand at the end of the 1970s into the early 1980s, when the Trident and the cruise issues arose and the kind of mass public concern, the outcry against that. We very rapidly developed into some tens of thousands of national members. I think at the peak, I'm sure it will be in our witness statement, perhaps 100,000 national members, but we have and had different membership categories. So we have local group membership as well, and maybe around 250,000 local members too. But of course, many people identified as supporters of CND. So the public concern about the missiles and the nuclear weapons was really very extensive.
Can you assist, please, with the structure of CND at the relevant time? And you've made, I think, reference to, first of all, there being local groups. Is that right?
Correct.
So could you tell us a bit about what a local group was and what being in one involved?
Well, I wasn't in a local group at that time, but I can tell you based on my knowledge of it and also what it's like today. So CND local groups are autonomous, so they operate within the framework of national policies as established by our annual democratic members' conferences. It's the members who make the policy of CND. Within that framework, they may meet on a weekly basis when things are very busy and urgent, or perhaps now more likely to be on a monthly basis. They will meet probably in someone's home, or if having a larger public meeting, in a church hall or a local community centre, and they will discuss perhaps holding a local stall, how to do leafleting, how to collect signatures on a petition. Very often national CND, certainly the case now, provides materials on our latest campaigns that the groups can use in the ways that they choose. And very often, depending on where they're located, they choose a particular area of speciality. So if they're located near a nuclear base, for example, say they live in Berkshire near Aldermaston, they may have a focus on that. But if they live in East Anglia, they might decide to focus on nuclear power stations. So they have a considerable degree of autonomy, but they must work within the framework of CND policy.
Does it follow then that there are levels above the local group?
Well, the structure of CND is that the sovereign body is the members' conference, as I just mentioned, which is an annual conference where all members may attend and all groups and members may submit motions to be discussed by the conference. That conference also elects the leadership of CND. In addition to that national structure, where there is national membership, and of course an individual can be a member of national CND without having to be part of a local branch. Some people choose just to be a member and to donate and to receive newsletters and so on. So that's perfectly fine, of course. Then there's a regional tier. So not all areas today are covered by active regions, but I think at that time certainly there would have been active regions throughout the country, so they would have their own annual conferences and elect their own leaderships, employ their own workers and so on, working, as I say again, within the framework of CND national policy. And they would make reports back to the National Council of what work they were doing, and they could be asked questions and report on events and share ideas and so on. And then below that there would be some perhaps tiers of district organisation or area organisation, but very much depending on the kind of how the membership is in that particular area and what issues there are. So there is a clear structure, an accountable structure, but within that there is flexibility for organic development. And of course, one of the things we found in the 1980s was this huge increase in local groups as people set up local town committees and groups against the missiles and so on. And then, as you'll be aware, a lot of those chose to affiliate to CND. So a kind of a good inclusive structure. So I put an emphasis on inclusive.
Did CND have any staff in the early 80s, going through to the 90s?
I'm not sure how many there were at the end of the 1970s, perhaps just a handful, but certainly I know that by the height, perhaps, of CND's kind of numerical kind of growth, perhaps there were about 40 members of staff at the CND National Office.
And who would staff be working under or reporting to?
Well, I'm not absolutely certain of the structure in the office, but of course the General Secretary, I think at that time, of course, that was Monsignor Bruce Kent. He would be in the office discussing, talking with people, but of course there would be people responsible for different departments too. I wouldn't like to guess what they were, but relating to different areas, administration, finance, periodicals, and so on.
Is it correct that there were also specialist sections within CND?
Yes, there were and are specialist sections. Specialist sections are groups, they're self-organising groups of CND members with a particular interest. So, for example, Christian CND, we have a very active Christian CND today. They choose to gather together and work out collectively how they will advance CND concerns in the faith community. And of course, the faith community is a very big part of CND and always has been historically as well. We've had some very senior members of Christian denominations in particular involved with CND. We've also had, sadly no longer because of the age question, a very active ex-services CND. We've always had some very significant high-level military figures involved in and supporting CND, preferring public money to be spent on other elements of defence and not on nuclear weapons. We also have and had a Labour CND organisation. At different times we've had Green CND, Liberal Democrat CND. We've had Conservative Party members in CND, but not, I think, ever organised as a specialist section. Youth and student CND, at that time I think youth CND and student CND. I'm struggling to think if I've missed any out, but generally self-organising groups.
Thank you. Now, did I understand you correctly that it was the National Conference that was the main, and remains the main decision-making body within CND?
They meet annually to set CND policies and priorities. So they're not a body which takes monthly or weekly decisions. The bodies in whom the authority is invested between the annual conferences and who are accountable to the annual conferences are the National Council, the national officers, the nationally elected officers, and I believe at certain times there have been executive committees. It's not something that has been working since I've been in the leadership of CND, but I believe there have been executive committees in the past.
How often was the National Council meeting during the 1980s and 90s?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Don't know. Do you have any approximate idea? Would it go into double figures, for example, or once a month?
I wouldn't like to guess.
All right. Are you aware whether their meetings would be recorded or minuted?
Minuted, certainly. All the minutes of all those meetings are publicly available in our archive at the LSE Library.
And would such records be disseminated down the tiers of the CND organisation?
I imagine so.
Do you know if that extended all the way down to the local groups?
I think it would depend on how assiduous the representatives were. So the situation today is that we have elected members of the CND Council. We also have delegates from regions and specialist sections as well. And it is expected that those delegates will go back and share the decisions and the discussions and the information from the council down through the layers, so to speak, of CND. So if you have someone who takes their responsibility seriously, then certainly you will get a good report in your local group. If you have someone who was not doing that, then you wouldn't, or you might get something a bit more patchy. But they weren't secret, and the idea, of course, was to ensure that as many members as possible knew the thinking and the decisions of the leadership.
Now, I think you've been made aware that CND was infiltrated by two undercover officers during the 1980s, the first known by the inquiry cipher HN65 and cover name John Kerry, and the second HN88 cover name Timothy or Tim Spence. And I think having considered the documents, you were able to ascertain that between them they had attended national conferences. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is it right that from the documents you've seen, it appears that they were reporting on national conferences for the period between 1981 through to 1986?
That's correct.
Thank you, Ms. Hudson. I want to move away from structure now and just ask you a little bit about the sort of activity or action that CND has historically been involved in. At the moment, I don't want to talk about non-violent direct action. We'll discuss that later, but just concentrate at the moment on the more typical mainstream type activity that those involved in CND would become, those involved with CND would become involved in. And I think you told us a little earlier in your evidence when you were talking about local groups, they would be involved in the sorts of things like leafleting, setting up information stalls, petitioning and the like. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I think you also told us that they would have regular meetings of the group. Is that right?
Yes.
And you made reference to also perhaps having meetings that were open to the public in a venue that is larger than somebody's own home. Is that right?
Yes.
What about activity on a regional level? Just looking back again at the 80s through to the 90s, what sort of campaigning would the regions get involved in?
First of all, I'd just like to add one or two things that groups would be likely to do. Mm-hmm. So, as well as very much the locally orientated campaigning, kind of street campaigning, so to speak, of course, we've always had a very strong strand of engagement with parliamentarians. So, local lobbying of MPs is something that would be very much taken up. Nowadays, of course, that tends to be online lobbying, but at that time, writing to MPs, expressing concerns, perhaps writing to government ministers as well. Of course, demonstrations too, peaceful national demonstrations, of which we have always had a considerable number, from the Aldermaston marches in the late 50s, early 60s through to today. But of course, there were some significant national marches, peace marches in the 1980s, which local groups would, as much as possible, mobilise for and come and participate in. And then there would be perhaps local engagement with other campaigns and organisations, as well as engagement with local trade unions where members were active trade unionists. So there's quite a wide range of activities, both locally orientated and engaging with national initiatives too. So on the regional level, yes. Depending on the activity level of that region, and of course some regions are always more active than others, the elected leadership of any particular region might decide to organise particular events, perhaps a conference or a local protest, depending on local sites of interest and so on. So, yeah, certainly at a regional level there would be different initiatives.
And what about on a national level? What sort of activity would CND engage in on a national level?
So, well, periodically organising national demonstrations, but of course they don't happen all the time. Engaging in media work, that's something that's always been the responsibility of the National Office with reference to the national media, also parliamentary campaigning there, engagement with diplomats as well, lobbying. This is all engagement for lobbying purposes, discussions with and lobbying with civil servants in relevant ministries. What else? Providing materials for use by local groups, publications, public education. We've produced books, many books and pamphlets, particularly at that time in the 1980s, working in alliance with other organisations. For example, in the 1980s, there was the development of the nuclear-free zones amongst local authorities, many of which declared themselves nuclear weapons-free zones, and so on. So within the framework of the decisions made by CND National Conference, providing materials, providing education, raising public awareness and trying to advance the cause of nuclear disarmament.
Could we now move on to what is termed non-violent direct action, or commonly known as NVDA?
Yeah.
And can you tell us what NVDA is?
Well, non-violent direct action is really pretty much what it says. It's taking campaigning action that is outside of the norm of, say, what is now called an A to B march or parliamentary lobbying or a street stall. It's always non-violent. That's the very essence of CND's campaigning, always non-violent. It can involve things like sitting down in a road, for example, or blocking access to a nuclear weapons establishment, or something to really raise the profile of a particular place. I think that's quite an important element of it. We may march to Parliament to protest, but also at certain points we might wish to highlight, say, Faslane Naval Base, for example, up in Scotland, a typical example of where there might be a blockade to raise awareness of the weapons of mass destruction that are located there. So that's a kind of typical type of form of NVDA.
Over the Tranche 2 period, did CND engage in or support NVDA type activity?
Yes, that's certainly the case. And in fact, from our foundation, almost from our foundation, NVDA has been a strand of activity within CND, more generally activity within the wider peace movement supported by CND. At the start of CND, when it was founded, there was the leadership was keen to distance itself from NVDA. Canon Collins, who was the chairman at that time, was very strongly of the view that CND should only engage in strictly legal campaigning, so demonstrations and lobbying and so on. But there was a strand of the movement at that time in the form of the Direct Action Committee Against Nuclear War, which believed that it was important to raise awareness directly of the bases and the building of the Thor missile bases, for example, in East Anglia, and to raise awareness of the weapons tests that were taking place in the Pacific and so on. So to actually go to those places and raise public awareness directly, but always in a peaceful, non-violent fashion. So
Canon Collins tried to hold the line, so to speak, against that, but there was an enormous amount of sympathy within CND for people who were prepared to take those forms of action. And it's not something that the majority in CND have ever wanted to do, but there's been great support and sympathy for people taking a very strong moral and principled stand against nuclear weapons in that way. So from quite early on in CND's life, a kind of position developed through conference decisions where both strictly legal and NVDA methods would be used and supported, but CND has always primarily not initiated NVDA itself. But of course, during the 1980s, when there was this massive, massive public concern about cruise missiles being sighted here, about Trident coming to Britain, about the escalation of nuclear war, then people were very open-minded to other forms of protest and feeling that whatever protest could be engaged in a non-violent way, then everything had to be done to prevent nuclear war. And of course, the peace camps were an example of this. You know, they were peaceful camps, but to raise public awareness. And I would say that they actually were very effective in raising public awareness of the issues.
Does it follow from what you've told us that CND's position on NVDA evolved over time with differing views and differing attitudes amongst those who either supported or were members of the movement?
I wouldn't say that it evolved over time particularly, because I think it evolved in the early years.
Yes.
And then after the early years, it was clear that while CND had its own sort of broader forms of organisation and activity, that there was a great respect for the non-violent direct action thread, and there was often support from CND, or CND members may be engaged in both types of work. But that was very much a settled position in CND from the early 1960s and continues to be so today.
Now, you've given us in your witness statement, by all means refer to it if you need to, at paragraphs 9.3 and 10.2, many examples of non-violent direct action. I'm just going to cite a few. Occupations.
Hang on a minute.
Forgive me.
Sorry.
You might want to start paragraph 9.3.
Yep.
I think you mentioned, I'm not going to go through all of them, but things like occupations and blockades, is that right?
Yep.
Sit-ins, another example.
Yes, yep.
And then also at 10.2 of your witness statement,
Yes.
talk about blocking roads again, and mention the cutting of wires at military bases. Is that the cutting of fences, wire fences?
Yes, it is.
See. Were there occasions when NVDA type activity involved the law being broken?
Yes, that's certainly the case. So, for example, blockading the entrance to a base, that would be, technically speaking, breaking the law. Yep.
Going to ask that we look at a document now, which is UCPI 16798.
Where do I find that?
It should come up on your screen. UCPI 16798, which is at B64 of the hard copy bundle, sir, for your reference.
That's a bit small for me to read. Where is it in my bundle?
All right.
Don't
Don't know if you have a full
It's
hard
become
copy
large,
bundle, but
it's
it'll
okay.
be magnified for you. All right.
Yes, thank you.
We'll try and magnify.
I've got
each of
it,
these
yeah.
documents. Now, I think we can see, I'm just going to summarise from paragraph 2 of the document, that this is an SDS intelligence report about the CND annual conference over the weekend of the 13th of November 1981. It's a report attributed to the undercover officer John Kerry. And paragraph 5, which starts, I think, on the first page and then proceeds over to page 2, reads as follows.
It's just coming up, sorry. It's a bit of a time lag. Okay.
Now, I think it says at something, it looks like a time, I think it's 1 p.m. The conference split up into the various groups already mentioned. By far the best attended workshop was that on direct action, where 150 delegates crammed into a small room, and many more were turned away at the door. During this session, it was overwhelmingly accepted that the time for direct action was near. All present agreed that this subject was not suitable for open discussion in conference, but equally all accepted the necessity for serious consideration of its implementation. With this in mind, it was decided that the National Council statement and direct action, see Conference Document 5 at Appendix C, Folio 6, did not go far enough, and it was unanimously agreed that a further sentence should be added, see Appendix C, Folio 19. During the session, suggestions for occupying or blocking the approach to the cruise missile computer control centre at High Wycombe, occupying Downing Street, more peace camps like Greenham Common, and making use of open days at US air bases were put forward. However, nothing concrete was decided, as it was felt that specific actions were better left to smaller groupings, with the eventual possibility of a federation of these groupings as the campaign progressed. Now, can we just go to one of the documents that's mentioned in paragraph 5, and that should be page 39 of the same document. So page 39 of the same document.
This isn't in my witness statement, is it?
I think you do cover it in your witness statement. Just bear with me a moment. Yes, paragraph 10.8 of your witness statement, Ms. Hudson. And the document itself, because it's not very clear, is at page 39.
Yes.
And I think you address in your witness statement what we can see, although albeit fuzzily in that document, what was said under the heading National Council Statement and Direct Action, which was CND supports regional and local groups in undertaking considered non-violent direct actions in pursuit of the British campaign. This is particularly urgent in view of the continued government rejection of popular demand to stop the Trident programme and rejecting the basing of cruise missiles in this country. In particular, the conference supports the peace camps at Greenham Common or elsewhere and actions against Operation Hard Rock next autumn.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then at page 106, please, of the document on the screen, which you address on the same page of your witness statement, Ms. Hudson.
I'm a bit lost.
Yes, forgive me, all right. We're just going to get page 106 on the screen. And if you're following this on your witness statement, you should be at page 48 where you address this document.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think we can see that an amendment to that statement we've just looked at was proposed that says also the CND National Council will undertake to provide a hand to groups and organise actions in cases where considered direct action is felt necessary.
Yeah.
Are the contents of that report an example of the increased interest I think you were telling us about earlier in NVDA as a response to initiatives such as Trident and the like? Is that a fair representation that that sort of period of time there was an increased enthusiasm or consideration of NVDA to get the point across?
Yes, I think that given the increasingly dangerous and alarming circumstances in which Britain and Europe and the world found itself with regard to the escalation of the nuclear arms race and the risk of nuclear war, CND supporters and members and others more widely in the peace movement, but also in wider society, were concerned to raise awareness and take campaigning actions to make the public aware of the risks that were being faced, and also to convey to government that there was not public support, or there was considerable public opposition to government policies at that time. So, of course, CND has always been, our concern has been to change government policy. We felt that government was following the wrong policy on nuclear weapons, and we were exercising our democratic right to try and change that policy and to win widespread public support for that change. And that included taking non-violent direct action, as well as the more mainstream activities which CND has always engaged in.
Could I just ask that we return to page 2 of the document on the screen, please? So page 2, please. And I just want to go back to what was said and what we read out a little earlier, where it was stated in the report, all present are agreed that this subject was not suitable for open discussion in conference. Assuming that what is reported is accurate, can you think of any reason for avoiding open discussion of NVDA at the CND conference?
I imagine it was because it was a conference, I think at the start it says of 500 people. I can't see back to there, but it was a very large conference, and not everyone would have wanted to discuss non-violent direct action, because it's not something that everyone would be involved in. So rather than it being a kind of big plenary discussion of the whole conference, it was obviously, this is my opinion, of course, because I wasn't there, it was obviously kind of people who were interested in that were meeting separately for that. But I can see no reason other than that why it wouldn't have been suitable for discussion in conference. And of course there were so many participants there, any idea that having kind of secret discussions that shouldn't go any further, or doing something strange and weird that shouldn't be known about, there was absolutely zero possibility of such a thing taking place in any part of a CND conference.
Could we next look at UCPI 15563, which is at B38 of the hard copy bundle? UCPI 15563.
Before we move on to that document, yes, the two documents to which you referred, in addition to the report by the undercover officer, would they have been published, the resolutions adopted at the conference?
Yeah, they would certainly have been in the minutes of the meeting. Yeah. I mean, they were publicly available. I mean, that was essentially CND's position anyway. I think that the strengthening was that national CND should support such initiatives.
Yep.
And there may have been a concern that C&D nationally would say, oh, yes, of course, but wouldn't do anything about it and would stick to the things they normally do. So it would be a way of trying to make C&D nationally accountable to the decisions of the conference.
But the fact that the National Conference supported NVDA organised by local groups would be made public.
Yes. I mean, NVDA has never been a secret thing within C&D. It's a kind of strand of activity that we've supported since the early days, and at different times it has been more or less salient, and this was a point at which more of the members and supporters wished to engage in it because of the urgency of the situation.
Thank you, sir. Yes, could we look next at, I think what's on the screen needs to come off, please. Could we look next at UCPI 15563, which should be at B 38 of the hard copy bundle.
What section is that in?
It should come up on your screen. And I think if you want to see where you address it in your witness statement, you'll find this at paragraph 10.10 at page 49. This is an intelligence report dated the 28th of August 1981. Another report by John Kerry, and at paragraph 2 we can see that this report relates to a meeting of the Hampstead C&D group that took place on the 19th of August 1981. And I just want to look at paragraph 6, please, which is on the second page, which says this: many persons at the meeting felt that the time was drawing near when the group would have to offer recruits more than film shows, book sales, and meetings. Many newcomers were keen to get involved in some form of direct action in support of the campaign, and providing an outlet for this will be a priority following the October demonstration.
Yeah.
Again, is that an example, this time at local level, of increased interest in NVDA, given the climate that you've described that was operative at that time?
Yes, I would say that was the case. I mean, the first sentence is basically saying people in the meeting feel we can't just have business as usual. We can't just go on doing our normal activities. We've got to do other things. So, first of all, they were going to mobilise for the massive demonstration in October of that year, and then they were going to be discussing what other things they may do.
Could we next look at UCPI 19584, which should be at tab B273 of the hard copy bundle? It should come up on your screen shortly, Ms. Hudson. UCPI 19584. It's another report of John Kerry, this time dated the 11th of October 1983, so we've jumped ahead a couple of years now. And at paragraph 2, we can see that the report deals with a letter written by the then CND chair, Joan Ruddock, to the secretaries of all CND groups. And I'm just going to read out some of what it says. Joan Ruddock, chairperson of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, has written to the secretaries of all CND groups in the United Kingdom in an attempt to ascertain the grassroots preference for the type of non-violent direct action for December 1983, the anniversary of the decision to site cruise missiles in this country, and the most likely month for their installation. In the letter, she outlines the following options, and there gives a few examples or proposals for NVDA.
The report goes on, CND group secretaries have been asked to forward the views of their members to their national council representatives before the weekend of 15th, 16th of October 1983, when a firm decision will be made at the National Council meeting, in addition to provisional plans by CND to stage direct action events in December. Both Green and Common and Upper Hayford peace camps intend holding similar events. Now, assuming that the contents of that report are accurate, do we see NVDA becoming more embedded by 1983?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by embedded.
Well, more discussion of getting involved in NVDA in practice rather than whether people should be getting involved at all.
I wouldn't put it quite like that.
Right.
I mean, it's not a question of whether people should or shouldn't do things. From the very early years of CND, NVDA was something which CND supported and supported the activities of others, and some of its members engaged in, and there was no requirement on members or no pressure on members to do that. Obviously, if you were risking arrest, that had to be a very personal decision, so no one would ever put pressure on anyone and say that they should do that kind of thing. So I would say that this is just a kind of a continuity of the discussions that have been taking place probably since the kind of cruise thing was first announced, but certainly since the minutes of that the national conference that you shared a moment ago in 1981. By this time, Greenham Common and other peace camps were already established, and some members of CND were involved in those, but they were absolutely not organised from CND, and it would be very disrespectful to the people, the campaigners who set up those camps, to imply in any way that CND ran or organised or controlled that. Not in the least. We were supportive of that, and members may or may not be involved in those kinds of things. This is well, I wasn't there at that time, as you know, but this is a typical consultation and very proper, right and proper consultation from the national leadership to the CND groups to ask them what type of thing they felt would be appropriate. And don't forget, there had been a massive explosion of membership and of CND groups. So there were hundreds of CND groups at this time. So I see this as a very right and proper democratic consultation with the organisation to make sure that the leadership was in line with what the grassroots members were thinking and what kind of activities they thought it was appropriate for CND to engage in.
Could we look next, please, at UCPI 19519? Should be at B266 of the hard copy bundle. That's UCPI 19519. Now, this is an intelligence report dated the 26th of September 1983, attributed to HN33, cover name Lee Bonser, who primarily infiltrated women's peace groups.
Greenham Common, I think.
Yes. And the report deals with a meeting of the Twickenham CND where a forthcoming anarchist Stop the City demonstration was discussed. And I just want to look at what's said at paragraph 4, which says a report on Stop the City was given by someone who had attended the last planning meeting. From her report, it appears that there is a certain lack of organisation amongst those planning the day. A carnival has been proposed, although no definite information is to hand. the organisers are hoping for 1 million people to occupy the streets and to enter buildings, to throw leaflets and smoke bombs and block emergency lifts and telephone switchboards. The proposed peace camp is apparently the first aid tent. Since the action is threatening violence, it was decided that a letter should be sent to national CND and local press to express reservations about it. Is that an example of CND's attitude to violence when it was proposed that it be used in the course of a demonstration or other such activity?
Well, clearly so. I mean, first of all, a Stop the City demonstration. I mean, I actually got vague memories of those sorts of things happening in the 1980s. It was not something that was within CND's framework of its remit, nothing to do with nuclear weapons, so it's not something that CND would have any relationship to. Clearly, an individual member from this group has gone along to see what's happening, and of course, you know, we don't constrain individual members in what they do in other campaigning, but this individual has clearly been concerned enough about what might happen that she or he has written to the local press, to express concern, and is raising concerns with national CND because of the threat of violence. I think this is typical of the concerns that would be felt by local CND members and indeed by national CND about anything that was based on violence. But as I say, or in which violence might take place. But this is not a kind of demonstration or an issue that CND would have been engaged with at all.
During the 1980s and early 90s, was there any perceivable situation where the use of violence or public disorder would be acceptable to CND? Can we please look next at UCPI 19246, which is at tab B239 of the hard copy bundle. So that's UCPI 19246. Another John Kerry intelligence report dated the 24th of June 1983. And this document relates to planning by London Region CND for a peace chain that was proposed link the United States and the USSR embassies on a date in July 1983. Now, very briefly, Ms. Hudson, could you just assist us with what a peace chain is?
Well, I imagine it's people holding hands across an expanse of kind of space. So, a human chain, a sort of link of individuals holding hands between two given points.
And we can see from paragraph 3 that the chief steward was identified as John Kerry of Hampstead CND. So that's the cover name for HN 65. And the document at paragraphs 4 and 5 says as follows: the organisers of the event are concerned that the numbers attending the event might well exceed their requirements, and arrangements are in hand for further consultation with Scotland Yard and the park authorities for an additional contingency spur to run through Hyde Park. Their concern is supported by the fact that they have already received notification of a train from Stevenage, plus coaches from various parts of the country, altogether capable of carrying sufficient people to form one link between the embassies. In addition, many other groups throughout the country have already expressed interest in supporting the event, bearing in mind that as yet no real publicity for the chain has reached the national and peace media. The organisers are working on a figure of 50,000 participants, However, nearer to the event, when full details of coaches are known, a revised estimate will be submitted. To organise the link-up, it has been decided that at least 200 stewards are required, and there's every indication that recruitment will exceed this number. The organisers are eager to avoid any confrontation with the authorities, and should there be any suspicion of disruptive elements at the event, police will be informed immediately.
Is it right that a peace chain is another example of NVDA?
No, I don't think it's an
Not.
NVDA. I think it's that's more like a demonstration. I mean, it's a kind of static individual demonstration linked up, but it's clearly more on the lines of just a demonstration, because there's been liaison in advance with the police. The route has clearly been arranged. There's a stewarding process. It's publicly announced. You know, no, I would say that's definitely not an NVDA in the same way that a demonstration is not an NVDA.
If people are linked from one point to another, is there not the potential to disrupt, for example, somebody trying to make a journey across the route of the chain?
Well, I think people would be willing to drop hands.
And it's activity that John Kerry, on the face of his own reporting, appears to have taken a role in. Are you able to assist us with how much responsibility a chief steward would have had at an event of this nature?
An enormous amount of responsibility, because in them would be invested the responsibility for ensuring the health and safety of the participants, having an overview of the stewarding operation. I mean, it refers there to at least 200 stewards are required, so there would be a stewarding map and a planning process in advance. Different sub-head stewards would be allocated with a team of individuals who would be working in a particular area. There would be legal observers, perhaps. There would be first aid kits. If there was going to be speeches, there would be a responsibility for platform and a microphone, and so on. So it's an extremely responsible position, and of course liaising with the police about all the arrangements.
Is what was stated in that report about liaison with police, both in advance of and during the event, typical of CND cooperation with the authorities during a large-scale action?
Yes, absolutely. It always has been, I think. Well, I wasn't around at the start, but I imagine it was. It's certainly the case today, and in ensuring public safety on such big events, it's a crucial thing.
Just want to look at a couple of other examples of interaction with the police, please. The first, UCPI 17982, which should be at tab B100 of the hard copy bundle. UCPI 17982. And that's a report of John Kerry, dated the 16th of March, 1982. And it relates to the CND national demonstration due to take place in
I don't think that's right. This document is dated the 2nd of April.
Forgive me. Yes, forgive me, sir. Yes, 2nd of April, 1982. Just bear with me, please. Yes, 2nd of April, 1982, but dealing with the national demonstration that was due to take place, I think, in June of 1982. And paragraph 3 reads that one of the main organisers of the event stated that due to the massive numbers anticipated to attend the demonstration, it will be necessary to split into 3 separate marches subject to police approval. Do you see that?
I do.
Ms. Hudson, thank you. And another example, please, UCPI 18233. Should be at B128 of the hard copy bundle.
UCPI 18233. A short report that attaches notes for marshals and stewards for the June 1982 national demonstration. And it states at paragraph, sorry, I ought to have said it's another John Kerry intelligence report, dated the 4th of June 1982. Paragraph 2 states, it's obvious from the instructions given in the document that the organisers of the demonstration wish the event to be peaceful and intend to give police every cooperation. Do you see that, Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Can we just look at the notes at page 2, please? And we can see some of what was said in relation to cooperation or otherwise with police at paragraph 4. All stewards are reminded that they're acting as private individuals and their status does not confer any advantages in law nor allow them to act as police officers in any way. It is vital that they refer to the police any matters which are likely to lead to breaches of the peace and not become involved themselves. See legal notes. Any problems should be reported to block stewards or legal advisors immediately. And then on the same page at paragraph 10, document reads, all stewards will be acting first and foremost as ambassadors of C&D. Whatever else your job is, you're responsible for ensuring that this is a peaceful and successful demonstration. If any problems arise between marchers and the police, you are the people to deal with it. See legal notes for stewards. And just over, please, to paragraph 7 of that document, headed legal points for stewards. Just want to look at some of what it says here. Paragraph 1, the arrangements for the assembly, march and rally have been agreed with the police subject to the proviso.
I'm not getting that on my screen.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. It's my fault. I should have been paying attention. So it should be page 7 of the document, headed legal points for stewards. It's not the right page. Should be the page before that. That's the one. So paragraph 1, the arrangements for the assembly, march and rally have been agreed with the police subject to the proviso that they can make alterations when necessary. If you feel that you're being asked to do something without good reason, do not offer physical resistance to or argue with individual constables, but contact a senior steward and or one of the legal advisors. Explanations should be sought from senior policemen wearing flat caps and with pips on their shoulders, who will be standing apart from the policemen actually accompanying the march. Remember that the arrangements made for street collections, banners, etc. relate only to C&D and its constituent groups. Inevitably, members of other organisations will use such a large gathering to sell and distribute literature and take collections, and some of these people may be subject to action, it looks like, by the police. No matter how unjustified this type of police action may seem to you, do not become involved in these incidents if they occur and try to dissuade our marchers from doing so as well. If any form of disturbance occurs involving C&D marchers and police, your role will be to help bring this to an end as soon as possible, and in doing so keep the number of arrests to a minimum. Experience shows that a large proportion of those arrested at demonstrations are people who are protesting at or trying to impede an arrest, which has taken place earlier. Getting involved with arguments with the police at ground level will not help the person who has been arrested and will put you in danger of being arrested yourself. And at paragraph 5 says, make up your mind that you are going to keep your cool at all times, even if the police and other people lose theirs. The less trouble there is, the less scope there is for the enemies of the movement to denigrate us. And the document concludes, remember, at all costs, confrontation is to be prevented. If something untoward does occur, inform a legal advisor or senior policeman immediately. Ms. Hudson,
is that example typical of the sort of instruction that might be given to stewards at an event of this nature?
It absolutely is, yes. I mean, don't forget that on these demonstrations there would be huge numbers, and many of those would be families with children, with pushchairs and so on. I mean, our marches are typical for their broad and inclusive nature. So ensuring the safety of the marchers is absolutely paramount, and stewards are very well briefed to make sure that they ensure that the march carries off in a peaceful fashion.
In relation to planned events, were there occasions when CND worked with the police or authorities in advance?
Well, I wasn't there, but I imagine so. It's certainly the case now.
Can we look at document UCPI 22171, which should be at B433 of the hard copy bundle? UCPI 22171. And this is a report attributed to HN88 Tim Spence, dated the 17th of January 1986. And we can see that it's an intelligence report regarding a London Region CND demonstration outside the Italian Embassy in London on the 25th of January 1986. And paragraph 3 reads as follows. Police will not be informed of this proposed action, as it was felt that by doing so too many restraints would be put on the demonstrators. The action is being publicised through a forthcoming London Region CND mailing to group secretaries. It is expected that the demonstration will be from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. On the above date. Ms. Hudson, does it follow that there were occasions when the police were not consulted in relation to planned CND activity?
Well, on this occasion, it wouldn't have been necessary to inform the police because it was a static demonstration.
Just returning to NVDA type activity.
Yeah.
Was it possible that NVDA type activity could be undermined if the police were notified of it in advance?
That is certainly the case, but it varies really from event to event. So, for example, you may be aware that today a peace camp is being set up at RAF Lakenheath in opposition to US nuclear weapons coming back to Britain, although that is a peace camp and might be described as nonviolent direct action. The organisers, the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace, which includes CND, have actually been in touch with the police about arrangements in advance to ensure the safety of the participants. So in circumstances like that, obviously there is police liaison to ensure safety, even though it's not a kind of regular form of protest activity. In certain cases where individual campaigners are prepared to take what might be described as illegal action, so for example blocking a road, yes. And willing to risk arrest and to do that on the basis of the defence of necessity, that it's necessary to commit a smaller offence in order to prevent a larger one, i.e. the use of nuclear weapons, proliferation of nuclear weapons. Obviously one wouldn't inform the police about those because you would want to be able to get into place in the road before you were moved, so you could have that impact of, say, blocking traffic entering a base. So clearly, under certain circumstances, you wouldn't, with NVDA, inform the police in advance.
Could we now look at UCPI 15339? So UCPI 15339 should be B27 of the hard copy bundle. and it should be an intelligence report dated the 19th of May 1981, attributed to John Kerry. And it relates to a CND conference over the weekend of the 9th of May 1981. And just want to look at something, says at paragraph 6, which is following the opening session of the remaining time, the remaining time was spent in workshop discussions covering a number of topics related to CND. By far the most popular of these was nonviolent direct action. However, no decisions were reached as to the form of direct action should take. The discussion covered a variety of suggestions from fly posting to occupation of and damage to government bunkers and incorporated sit-downs. However, it was unanimously agreed that some form of direct action was necessary within the near future, and it was decided that a conference should be convened to deal with the specific question of direct action. And then I think at pages 4 to 5 of that document, we can see, it's not very clear, I'm afraid, but we can see some proposed examples, or not proposed examples, forgive me, examples of NVDA that were appended to this particular intelligence report. So that's a report about an NVDA workshop. There are just a couple of other reports that I want to show you in relation to activity that CND was involved in as regards NVDA, but I think given the time, sir, is that a convenient moment to break?
Certainly. We'll break for a quarter of an hour to enable the transcriber to have a well-deserved break.
Thank you. Ms Hudson, I'm going to stay with the topic of NVDA for the time being, and I'm going to ask to be brought up UCPI 17164.
Could I just possibly ask, you know, you showed us two things before the break.
Yes.
That it are all in this set that you're looking at.
Yes.
Would it be possible to show those again, given
Yes.
the break?
So you want to see the documents that you saw just before the break, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, that is UCPI 15339. Should be B27 of the hard copy bundle. And was there something you wanted to add about this document, Ms Hudson?
There was another one before. I thought you were showing me a few and going to ask
what?
me about all of them together. So I just wanted to refresh my memory.
Well, this is the first.
Okay.
And we're going to go to another. So this is a report, just to remind you, about a CND conference where an NVDA workshop was held. And I just want to stick with the theme of workshops, training, day schools, that sort of thing in relation to NVDA.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you.
So the next document, please. Should be UCPI 20383, which should be at B349 of the hard copy bundle. So that's UCPI 20383. And this is a document attributed to the Undercover Officer Tim Spence, dated the 30th of July 1984, and it relates to a Hackney CND annual general meeting that was held in July 1984. And submitted with that report was a copy of that local group's annual report. And I just want to have a look at a small section of that annual report, which is at page 9, please. So there should be, I don't know if it can be expanded, thank you, just above centre, a heading NVDA training, which reads, ever since our first NVDA day school in May last year, training in nonviolent direct action has been an important part of our work. We have held 2 successful day schools this year, one in April and one in June. So that's just another example of NVDA or reporting on NVDA training. And just one more to look at, please, which is UCPI 18461. UCPI 18461, which should be at tab B146 of the hard copy bundle. Thank you. Now, this is a report dated the 19th of July 1982, attributed to John Kerry, and it deals with an NVDA training weekend that was to be held in July 1982. And just picking up at paragraph 2 reads as follows. The North London Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament has arranged a non-violent direct action training weekend for Saturday 24th of July 1982 at the Crypt, St John the Evangelist M1. Most of the arrangements have been made by someone of Wood Green CND and someone of Hampstead CND, who hope to attract about 100 activists from the North London area. Instructors or facilitators, as they prefer to be called, will be provided by someone, a full-time worker at the CND National Office. The cost of the course will be £8 per person. A copy of the registration form is attached to this report. And then the second page of that appears to be some sort of flyer. And just looking at that, that second document, please. This sort of flyer, would that be circulated amongst people within the group, or in your experience, were these sorts of flyers circulated generally or publicly?
Well, it varies. I mean, I've no idea with regard to this particular one.
Yes.
But as it's from North London C&D, which is rather a large group, it may well be that it was only really aimed at C&D members, because obviously a church crypt isn't going to, you can't have masses and masses of people in a church crypt. But now I imagine that this one would have been primarily aimed at members of C&D in North London, but I couldn't say that for certain.
In the 1980s through to the early 90s, how common were NVDA day schools, workshops and training weekends?
Well, I don't know. I imagine that they were reasonably common. And what I think this shows, I mean, I think it's very impressive, if I can say that, how seriously the local groups and local campaigners were taking non-violent direct action in the sense of preparing properly for it, having proper briefings, proper training sessions, and not just saying, right, we're all going to go somewhere and block something, really taking it seriously. So that would have been with due regard for legal questions, health and safety, making sure that the individuals themselves were safe and knew that they knew about breaking the law and what that might entail. So I'm very pleased to see these, actually.
Well, I was going to ask you what the purpose was of such education, but I think you've answered that, so
Yeah.
I'm grateful. Drawing from your experience or from the documents that you've seen, would it be fair to say that education and training on NVDA was an ordinary part of CND activity in the Tranche 2 period?
It seems so.
Thank you. Can we look now at UCPI 17164? And this is a report attributed to John Kerry, dated the 11th of February 1982. It primarily addresses CND's growth. But I just want to draw your attention to paragraph 7, which reads as follows: the third and potentially most dangerous avenue of activity involves groups which are planning for non-violent direct action. This is a new development within the revived CND and is a reflection of the hardening of attitudes of many CND members as the arrival of cruise missiles draws near. In addition to these members, non-violent direct action attracts the libertarian groups, anarchists, London Greenpeace, the Peace Pledge Union, the Anti-Nuclear Campaign, and various sections of the women's movement. The problems presented by non-violent direct action, which has been developed in the light of experience gained from marches and demonstrations held in the 1960s and 1970s by the Committee of 100 and the ANC, are evident in the basic principles instilled at non-violent direct action training weekends. And the report goes on to set out what the author says are some of those principles. Can I just ask you, just focusing on paragraph 7, please?
I'm not seeing that on my screen.
No, I'll just wait for it to come up. So paragraph 7, please, of the document at page 2. Do you have anything to say about the description of potentially the most dangerous avenue of activity?
Well, to be honest, I find this paragraph quite extraordinary, and it's not expressed in any terminology that I recognise in relation to CND or the peace movement. Nonviolent direct action was a campaigning method that was well known and had been in existence for a very, very long time, at least since the 1950s, and was embraced by the peace movement generally, albeit in a kind of perhaps a minority form of action. So it's hard to see how it could be described as most potentially, or at least at all, a dangerous avenue of activity, not least because it was non-violent direct action. And I think that all the forms of action that we have described here, which you've read to me, none of those are in any sense violent, in any sense dangerous. So I don't quite understand where this person is really coming from. And this reflection of the hardening of attitudes of many CND members. I mean, what exactly does hardening mean? You know, CND members are deeply committed, as I've said before, very moral, very concerned about the future of humanity. So they may well have been, you know, more concerned and more determined as the arrival of cruise missiles came near. But I don't understand how that could be described as a hardening of attitude, in inverted commas, which makes it sound like a dangerous or threatening thing. On the contrary, people would have been more concerned and more determined to make their voices heard and to win the case for the non-arrival of cruise missiles. And of course, they turned out to be quite correct, because as you'll be aware, with the signing of the and ratification of the INF Treaty just a few years later, the missiles which arrived were taken away again. You know, so this is a strange phraseology. And in this list of things that NVDA attracts, you know, it talks about a Peace Pledge Union, which is a historically very long-standing, highly respected pacifist organisation. You know, so how they could present any danger, I don't know. The anti-nuclear campaign, as I've said to my legal team before, I've never heard of the anti-nuclear campaign. I've no idea what that is, and I couldn't comment on the other organisations. But this seems to me a strange paragraph.
Thank you. Next document, please, is UCPI 20631, which should be at B, tab B 346 of the hard copy bundle. This is a report attributed to HN33 Lee Bonser, dated the 8th of June 1984. And it's a report that submits some leaflets and posters advertising a demonstration at Chilwell Ordnance Depot that was supposed to be held on the 1st of July of 1984. And I'm not going to go through it in any detail, but can we just look at the second and third pages, please?
I'm not seeing it in close-up.
I'm just going to have them brought up. So page 2 and 3, if we could have them just next to each other.
Could I possibly see that first page enlarged?
Yes,
again?
of course.
The first page, yes, that's it, first page of the report.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So over the page, we have a document headed Reclaim Chilwell. If we look at the top right of the document, it says Care of Nottingham CND. And in the body of that document, it
tells us, under the heading "The Action," that the major event of the day is going to be a mass trespass onto the base. Starting at 1 o'clock, we advise all those intending to take part in the action to read the briefing sheet and, if possible, have some sort of NVDA training. Now, it may be that you can't assist, but do you know if this sort of leaflet or poster would have been made publicly available, or would it been something confined to those who are interested?
I don't know.
Right.
But I mean, the fact is, whether or not it was intended to be just for members or more widely, C&D was a massive organisation at that time.
Yes.
So putting something out in this form just shows that it wasn't intended to be secret in any way, because inevitably, even if it was only sent to members, lots of people could have seen it, you know.
Are you able to assist with how much NVDA featured in C&D's activities in England and Wales over the period that we're looking at, so 1980s, early 1990s? Are you able to give us any idea of how much NVDA activity featured?
I can't really shed any light on that. I'm obviously aware of the peace camps. There were a number of peace camps. There were obviously protests at other places, but how many or to what extent and over what period, I'm afraid I don't know.
Now, I just want to ask you about a couple of things that John Kerry said in his witness statement, and Timothy Spence said in his witness statement, all right? You address the first of these in your witness statement at paragraph 7.5. So it's page 38 of your witness statement, paragraph 7.5. I don't think it needs to be up on the screen. Thank you. Now, what John Kerry said in his witness statement, and I won't bring it up on the screen unless you think necessary, but what he said at paragraph 140 was this: in my view, CND itself did not pose a significant risk of public disorder. There were, however, elements within it and fellow travellers alongside it that could potentially pose a challenge, and this was particularly true of the NVDA activist element. Do you agree with that assessment?
What date was this?
So this is something that UCO John Kerry said in his witness statement. It doesn't come from any contemporaneous intelligence report or anything like that. But you address it at paragraph 7.5 of your witness statement.
Okay, could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. Do you want me to read out what he said again?
No, I can see that
All
here.
right.
Just what was your question?
Do you agree with his assessment?
Yes, I don't think C&D posed any risk of public disorder, significant or not.
Thank you.
The reason I asked the question about timing is because it appears from documents that I've read that this assessment about C&D not presenting a risk took place quite early
Yes.
in the period of surveillance, so to speak. Yes. So one wonders why, given that this was an accepted position, why the surveillance continued until 1986.
We'll look at some of those documents a little later.
Okay, thank you.
Next, and you address this at paragraph 7.6, page 39 of your witness statement. Next, I want to ask you about something Timothy Spence said in his witness statement. He said, "I'm asked why I infiltrated CND. There was the potential for public disorder through marches and blockades. I did not consider Hackney CND or CND generally was subversive. I did consider that it had the potential to cause a challenge in respect of public order. The only criminality would be public order related or fly posting." Is that an assessment that you agree with or disagree with?
I'm not quite sure I understand all the legal terminology there. I mean, could you just explain
Yes, if I
that?
break it down.
And is it possible, where can I see that?
Yes, we could bring it up for you. So
Yeah.
it's MPS 0748356. It should be page 46. Page 46, please. No, I think this is the wrong reference. Could we try, instead of using the page number, could we try paragraph 141 instead? Right. So paragraphs 141. I'm asked why I infiltrated CND. There was the potential for public disorder through marches and blockades. Blocking the main road is mentioned in the report, and it gives the number of the report. And then paragraph 142. I did not consider Hackney CND or CND generally was subversive. I did consider that it had the potential to cause a challenge in respect of public order. The only criminality would be public order related or fly posting. And the question that I asked was, do you agree with that assessment?
Not in total, no.
Tell us where you're different.
Yes. CND was not, never has been, subversive at all. So in that sense, I agree. Can I just see the previous? Yeah. So he in 141, so it says there was potential for public disorder through marches and blockades. I don't agree with that. I mean, I suppose in the abstract there might be potential, but there was zero public disorder through marches and blockades. So, you know, the likelihood of that happening would be minute, and it never happened. Okay, so that's the sense in which I disagree with him. And yeah, it had no potential to cause a challenge in respect of public order. So yes, CND was not subversive, never was, never has been, and it did not have potential for public disorder through marches and blockades.
Thank you. I want to move on to a different topic now, please, Ms. Hudson.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, is it fair to say that those who supported CND or were members of CND, they were made up of people from all backgrounds and walks of life and of diverse political opinion? Is that a fair observation?
Yes, CND is and always was a very broad church, including people from all walks of life, all faiths and none, different political perspectives and none. And as I've stressed previously, we were, in essence, a deeply moral organisation, organising to change government policy to bring an end to Britain's possession of nuclear weapons, and also campaigning for a world free of nuclear weapons.
I want to ask you about something else that the undercover officer John Kerry said in his witness statement, and I think this time it probably would be useful to have it up on the screen. So MPS 0743186. And if we could go to page 30, please. think then, yes, over the page to page 31, forgive me. Thank you. And just focus in on paragraph 91, please. And there, the undercover officer is addressing a report dated the 19th of May 1981, which deals with an attempt, it's said, by an organisation called Revolution Youth to take over the St Pancras branch of CND because it appears to be a typical Trotskyist tactic. And the officer goes on to say this: as far as I'm aware, CND was originally a Communist Party of Great Britain controlled organisation, which was therefore Soviet controlled throughout the 1960s and less rigidly Soviet influenced during the 1970s. In keeping with the politics of the time, Trotskyist groups used to try to diminish CPGB control and push their own agenda, including seizing control where possible. Is there any accuracy in the assertion that CND was a CPGB controlled or Soviet controlled or Soviet influenced organisation?
None whatsoever. I mean, that is absolute complete nonsense, as anyone who knows anything about the history of CND will know. I mean, I mentioned earlier on about some of the eminent figures and leading church people and military figures that have been involved in CND from its founding throughout. So I'm very sorry that any government department or anyone has received this misinformation and has made any kind of political decision or other decision on the basis of it.
Could we look at another document, please? UCPI 17271, which should be at B93 of the hard copy bundle. It's 17271. This is a report dated the 16th of March 1982, attributed to John Kerry. And it deals with a dispute between the Green and Common Peace Camp and National CND. But I just want to look at something it says at the beginning of paragraph 4, which is this. The above incident does, however, highlight a recent development within CND, following allegations in the press that CND receives financial support from the USSR. National CND has not only opened its books to disprove the allegations, but has also made strenuous efforts to discourage support from CPGB. Just drawing on what you know, Ms. Hudson, about the history of the campaign, is it right that CND did reveal its accounts?
I've no idea, but I have seen it referred to on a number of occasions, so I assume that is the case. I mean, certainly CND now, and I don't know for how long, always annually publishes all its accounts. Yes. It's a matter of public record on the website. Prior to that, I guess, before websites, I guess it was made available in other words, in other forms. But just to say just a little more about this. I mean, this allegation of somehow kind of complicity with the USSR, that seemed to be developing around that time. And to the extent that our General Secretary, Monsignor Bruce Kent, at that time offered a prize of £100 to anyone who could provide evidence that CND received money from the USSR. And of course, no one ever came forward to claim it. So I think it was a kind of malicious, perhaps politically motivated piece of bad faith to suggest something like that was true. And of course, one can only surmise that because we were winning a lot of popular support for a change in government policy away from receiving cruise missiles, that somehow for political motivation there were attempts to smear CND and suggest that it was something that it wasn't.
There was no embargo on members of CND or its supporters associating with activity going on in the Soviet states. Is that right?
I doubt it, but I don't know. I mean,
can we just forgive?
CND was an enormous organisation.
Yes.
You know, we didn't tend to exert rules and controls on our members other than that they supported CND's policies and its kind of code of behaviour.
Just look at an example. It's not in the hard copy bundle, but it's UCPI 25241. UCPI 25241, which for anybody's note is at B438 of the hard copy bundle, although I don't think, sir, it's in your bundle. It's a report attributed to Tim Spence, dated the 14th of March 1986. And relates to an invitation that was afforded to the Secretary of the London Region, CND, to an international conference on disarmament being organised by the Soviet Peace Committee. And we can see that at paragraph 2 that a vote was taken and the vast majority agreed that that individual should be able to attend that event on behalf of the region. So does it follow from that, or is that an example where we can see there was no prohibition or control on individual members and supporters having anything to do with anything going on in the Soviet states?
Well, this is talking about an international conference on disarmament,
yes,
being organised by the Soviet Peace Committee. And to the best of my knowledge, CND has always and still is always keen on discussion and dialogue. So it wouldn't surprise me that individuals or even representatives of CND might engage in an international conference called by such a committee. It doesn't imply support for the politics of the state from which that committee is coming, but it suggests an openness to dialogue, to engage with peace activists from other countries, and to kind of advance the dialogue for peace and disarmament. So this doesn't seem particularly strange to me at all. How much interchange there was with organisations from other countries, or indeed from the Soviet bloc, I don't know. But dialogue is something that CND has always subscribed to in the interests of a more peaceful world.
Thank you. I just want to look now with you at a couple of examples of what was being said in the course of some of the intelligence reporting about representatives of other groups within CND. All right, and can we start with UCPI 15331, which should be at B25 of the hard copy bundle. I wonder if that could be magnified slightly. Thank you. That's a report dated the 18th of May 1981, attributed to HN 65 John Kerry. And it's an intelligence report about what was reported to have been an attempt by a group called Revolution Youth, which I won't take you to it, but it's suggested by HN 65 in his witness statement to be a Trotskyist-influenced group. And the report suggests that there was an attempt by that group to take control of the St Pancras group of CND. Do you see that?
Yes, I can see that.
Thank you. And then the next example that I'd like you to have a look at, please, is UCPI 15339. UCPI 15339, which is a report we've already looked at, actually, but should be at B27 of the hard copy bundle. And this, as I think I've already pointed out today, is a report attributed to John Kerry. It's dated the 19th of May 1981, and it relates to a C&D conference over the weekend of the 9th of May 1981. And I just want to look at something that's said at paragraph 7 of that report, please. Thank you. Now, what's reported there is a further sentiment arising from the conference was the vehement opposition expressed by the vast majority to attempts by the Socialist Workers' Party and the International Marxist Group to take over the campaign. Do you see that, Ms.
I do, yes.
Thank you. And then another report we've already considered. This is UCPI 17164. UCPI 17164, which should be at B75 of the hard copy bundle. And it's a report dated the 11th of February 1982. It is attributed to HN65 John Kerry. As I think we've mentioned before, principally it's about growth within CND, but I just want to look at what it says at paragraphs 4 and 5, please. Paragraph 4 begins, those involved with national and regional organisation believe that CND's main strength lies in the large amount of support which at present it attracts. Their field of activity is aimed at swaying large bodies of influential opinion at trade unions, the media, church groups, politicians, doctors and teachers. This area of activity causes considerable infighting as groups with vested interests try to move the campaign in the same direction as their own politics or beliefs. Major lobbies within this field are the Labour Party, the Communist Party of Great Britain, Christians, and to a lesser extent the Socialist Workers' Party and the International Marxist Group. Despite the considerable energies channeled into the campaign by the above organisations, the indications are that no single political body is remotely close to controlling its overall direction. Indeed, the CPGB has seen its influence wane quite dramatically as CND has developed. The reverse can be stated of the Trotskyist organisations with reference to trade union work and the establishing international peace links, I think that says, although there is no foreseeable likelihood of their influence growing in other CND fields of activity, and in particular the CND National Council. Again, just drawing on your own experience and what you know as a historian of the campaign, is there any merit in the suggestion that certain political groups or subversive groups try to become dominant within factions of CND or try and take factions of it over?
Was this dated 1981?
This is dated 1982.
82.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I just would, as a kind of side point, point out that this is in 1982. It's clear that those reporting on this consider that this is like a completely minor thing, and no single political body is remotely close to controlling its overall direction, because it was a mass, broad-based, popular organisation. So, I sort of again have this concern as to why this surveillance continued when it was clear that wasn't a problem. I would also just raise the terminology in this report again in point 4 there, line 4, where it says their field of activity is aimed at swaying large bodies of influential opinion. And we're talking about CND's main structures and bodies, and there's something about the use of the word swaying which suggests that it's kind of illegitimate in some way, or that it's kind of trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, where in actual fact, as I've said before, CND's goal was to win public opinion, to change government policy with regard to nuclear weapons, and particularly with regard to Trident and Cruise. So I don't sort of like the premise on which this comment is based. It seems to me that there was, I can't remember what your question was now, I apologise.
No, not at all. But what I was asking was, in your experience and drawing on your knowledge, is there any merit in any suggestion that certain political groups sought to become dominant or take over certain factions within CND at this time?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by factions within CND.
Whether it's influence at a branch level, regional level, national level.
Okay, in the structures of CND.
Yes.
I'm not aware of any attempts to do so. Clearly, there were people, members of CND, who had particular political affiliations, and they would make contributions based on their strongly held views and so on, or what they thought would be right for CND. But those in political minorities clearly very much remained political minorities with CND and didn't sway the kind of mass, broad perspective of the organisation. Interesting to see Christians listed there amongst those organisations. And you said something about subversive. I mean, as far as I know, whether or not one subscribes to any of the views of these organisations, they're not illegal organisations, and they're not kind of proscribed organisations in any sense. And of course, CND was a broad church, and people didn't have to be politically vetted or pass a test, kind of political correctness test, in order to join. So there were many diverse views within CND, but only as again referring to our two annexes in the first instance, CND's policies and sort of programme in 1958 and our aims and objectives now, they are pretty much virtually the same. So nothing, no diverse range of views from kind of minority groups has ever swayed CND off its broad approach, which makes this kind of infiltration and continued infiltration, once it's become clear that any of these perceived problems aren't actually problems, that it should continue for such a long time, is quite extraordinary.
I think you've probably answered my next question, but I want to put it to you directly, all right? But during the 1980s and early 1990s, did any political organisation or group or movement at any point become dominant or overly influential within CND?
Absolutely not.
Could we look next at UCPI 29239, which should be at tab C4 of the hard copy bundle. That's UCPI 29239. And this is a security service note for file that's dated 8th of March 1984, and it relates to a meeting between SDS management and the security service. And I just want to look at something that says, centre of the first paragraph.
So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 lines down. It says that the SDS assessment, SDS said that their assessment was that there was no effective ring of subversives unduly influencing the democratic structure of CND. Do you see that, Ms. Hudson?
I can, yes.
Thank you. And then another document along the same lines that I'd like you to have a look at, please. This one is UCPI 29305. It should be at tab C13 of the hard copy bundle. UCPI 29305. And again, just focusing on the first paragraph of this security service loose minute, dated the 2nd of October 1985. It states the 1985 CND annual conference is scheduled to take place from the 15th to the 17th of November in Sheffield City Hall. As you know, our study of subversive influences within CND has been reduced considerably since we reached the conclusion that while CND does include a large number of people who are also members of subversive groups, their impact on CND is limited. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Hudson, those documents are dated March 1984 and October 1985, respectively. Again, I just want to ask you, drawing on your knowledge of the campaign, in the years in advance or approaching 1984, 1985, drawing on what you know, was there any realistic possibility of subversive groups significantly influencing or controlling CND at any level?
Would you mind defining subversive groups, please?
Good question. Groups that seek to overthrow the state is the short definition.
Okay, 0.
Again, drawing on your knowledge, in your view, in the early part of the 1980s, before security service interests appeared to decline, as we see in those documents, could there have been any legitimate concern of CND being unduly influenced or taken over at any level by subversive or political groups?
No, none whatsoever. And I think it's, even though that I think that it's clear from other material that it was known throughout that CND didn't present any of that kind of risk. It's unfortunate that in 1983, CND was subject to what one could describe as a massive, unfounded political attack from parts of government. In fact, which was very detrimental to CND and to the good faith in which its members and supporters acted to try and change government policy.
Well, you've brought me on to my next topic, which is 1983, Ms. Hudson, and I want to look at with you, please, your Appendix 3, which is at A4 of the hard copy bundle. Your Appendix 3. So for the benefit of the operation of the technology, this is one of the appendices to the CND witness statement, UCPI 36931. Thank you. This is a document that you submitted, I think, Ms. Hudson, with your witness statement. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so. It's not in my annex.
You
here.
don't have it in hard copy, all right. Look, if we could focus on the screen, please, and if you're struggling, we'll see if we can get a copy to you. But It's a letter, I think, from Michael Heseltine, Member of Parliament, who was Defence Secretary at the time, to Conservative MPs and candidates in marginal seats, dated the 22nd of April 1983. Is that right?
I can't see a date
the
on
date is, well, take it from me, the date appears at the last page of the letter, 22nd of April 1983.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's right that in 1983 there was a general election held on the 9th of June. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And I just want to look at something that's stated in the letter at page 1, which is, I'm just looking at the second paragraph. Secretary of State's assertion there that it was official CND policy to oppose Conservative marginals during the campaign. Do you see that?
Where is that?
So second, on the left-hand side as you look at it, second paragraph down, two-sentence paragraph. I thought, therefore,
Oh,
I
yes,
would therefore
okay,
write
yeah.
to you about. All right. And then the concluding part of the third paragraph just below. That says this, that they, so that's CND, are an organisation led and dominated by left-wing activists ranging through the Labour Party to the Communist Party. Do you see that?
I do.
And I just want to go over the page, please, to page 3 now. And there's some narrative about the purpose of CND, and right at the top there it says that purpose, this is page 2, that purpose is the advance of the socialist and communist cause. Do you see that?
I do.
So I just put that in front of you for context, because we know that there was a general election in 1983. We know that the Defence Secretary adopted a particular position in relation to the campaign, and I just want to look at some of the intelligence reporting in the context in that context. Do you follow?
I do.
Thank you. First document I'd like to look at, please, is UCPI 15834. That's UCPI 15834. It should be at tab B 174 of the hard copy bundle. And this is a report, and to be fair about it, ought to make clear, predates the election by some months. It's dated the 27th of October of 1982. But at paragraph 2 relates to the London region CND's plans for a campaign in relation to the forthcoming general election. I just want to read out what was reported. It says, London region of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament has prepared plans for a campaign at the next general election. In order to provide more information about the campaign, the following decisions have been taken. 1, a pilot campaign will be launched for one weekend in February 1983 and will involve petitioning and door-to-door canvassing in the Prime Minister's constituency of Finchley. 2, a general election fund will be set up, and 3, an election pledge will be taken by people who would be prepared to take a week off work to campaign prior to the election. Do you see that?
I do.
Thank you. And then next document, please, is UCPI 16955. 16955, which should be at tab B187 of the hard copy bundle. Thank you. Now, this report was put together in 1983. It's dated the 2nd of February 1983, again attributed to HN65 John Kerry. And at paragraphs 2 and 3 says this: the campaign for nuclear disarmament is incensed. Recent press reports that the Conservative Party intends to use the J. Walter Thompson Publicity Agency to counter their arguments
in an attempt to minimise the effects of this new development, someone, a member of Hampstead C&D and husband of someone else, a voluntary worker at C&D headquarters, has offered to make contact with a friend who works at the publicity agency with a view to obtaining prior information on any planned publicity campaign. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you have any observations about what you've seen regarding an undercover police officer reporting about CND's plans in advance of a forthcoming general election?
Well, I'd just like to start off by saying something about CND's electoral policy as I know it, certainly since I've been involved in the leadership, which is that we don't support individual candidates. We don't put up individual candidates. What we've done recently, and indeed did earlier this month, is to canvass all candidates to find out what their views are on CND issues, like nuclear weapons, for example, and make that information publicly available. And then we also use it for internal reasons to contact elected MPs who are sympathetic to our views and ask them to join parliamentary CND, which is a cross-party parliamentary group. I'm not absolutely clear from Michael Heseltine's letter what exactly CND's policy was during that election. So when he says, you know, they're targeting your marginals or whatever, I'm not quite sure what CND is actually called for. So that I don't know. But it sounds to me from the London region election campaign that they are clearly going to be going out raising awareness about the policies of the different parties. As you may know, the opposition leader at that time was Michael Foot, who was one of the founders of CND. And while he had been in the leadership of the Labour Party, Labour had again taken up a policy of supporting nuclear disarmament. It had previously had that policy around 1960. So it may well be that I'm sure many individuals and CND members wanted to support Labour because it had a policy of nuclear disarmament. So, but I don't know formally what the position of CND was at that time. But it seems to me to be perfectly right and proper that CND would want to share information if this was indeed the intention of the different parties' political positions, and to encourage people to vote for candidates who opposed nuclear weapons and supported nuclear disarmament.
And can I just come back to the question, which is really, how do you feel about the fact that an undercover officer seems to be reporting about CND's plans in advance of a general election?
Well, it makes one think, of course, that there was a kind of a political motivation, you know, rather than understanding it as CND is a campaigning organisation, a kind of lobbying group, and a lot of campaigning members and supporters who have a right to put forward and support a policy of nuclear disarmament, and to encourage a government that supports that, to somehow see it as illegitimate that an anti-nuclear organisation should be perhaps supporting anti-nuclear candidates.
Just want to take you to some later documents now. And the first is UCPI 29255. That is 29255, which should be at C12 of the hard copy bundle. Now, this document, dated the 28th of January 1985, is a record of a security service meeting with the Special Demonstration Squad. And I just want to take you to something that's said in the third paragraph, just before conclusion. Says this Tony Waite, who was a DCI at the time, the SDS, it implied that in light of the Parliamentary Select Committee, MPSB, so Metropolitan Police Special Branch, were looking again at their penetration of CND. Do you see that?
I do.
And I won't spend a huge amount of time on it, but just again to put it in context, and I think you mentioned this in your witness statement, Ms. Hudson, but there was a Parliamentary Select Committee that looked at Special Branch over the course of 1984 and 1985 and debated or examined certain revelations in relation to CND, one being an investigation of a CND, an individual CND member under the pretense that she was being investigated for a mail order fraud, but in fact it was her membership of CND that attracted Special Branch's attention. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the second, disclosures made by a former MI5 desk officer about Special Branch agents within CND, and her opinion that interest in the campaign was more political than anything else. Is that right?
That's correct.
So in January 1985, we can see that it suggested that the SDS were reconsidering their position in relation to CND. Can we look then at 29274, please? It's UCPI 29274, which should be at tab C17 of the hard copy bundle. And this is another security service record of a meeting between itself and the SDS Detective Chief Inspector, dated the 15th of October 1986. Paragraph 2 says this: DCI Waite said that the CND source, which is, I'm just going to pause there, that source it's referring to is Tim Spence, would shortly be retiring, and asked whether we would wish to support a successor in that organisation. F4 was adamant that there was no such requirement. Do you see that?
I do.
Thank you. And again, just to put this in context, I think you're aware that HN88, Tim Spence, continued reporting on CND up until 1986. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Next document I just want to look at in this context is UCPI 29277. That's UCPI 29277. It should be at C18 of the hard copy bundle. And I just want to look at, this is, forgive me, it's another security service file note regarding a meeting with the SDS Detective Chief Inspector. This is Malcolm McLeod this time. And February 1987, at paragraph 2, if we could just focus in on that, this is what's being said. The next recruit will, if McLeod's masters have their way, be targeted against those members of peace movements / CND who might become involved in direct action. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Right. Although it's caveated with McLeod himself would prefer to deploy an officer into the RCP or RCG. Did you see that?
Yes. Can I just ask,
Yes.
so as a result of that, what happened.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question, if I may, 'cause
Okay.
that's the way this process operates.
Sorry.
But we know, it's a fair question, we know HN88's deployment ended in 1987, all right? But what I wanted to ask you is that given what we've seen, and given that by the mid-1980s there seemed to be a general acceptance, as I think you've already pointed out, that there was little, if any, subversive influence within CND, how do you first of all feel that infiltration of the campaign did, as a matter of fact, carry on through to 1986?
Well, you just said that it was clear from the mid-80s, but I think from the documents it looks to me like it was clear long before that that wasn't the case. And so in terms of what you were saying about the select committee, what Cathy Massiter said,
Yes.
she used this term, that it was for political reasons. And given the general election in 1983, whereas I've just mentioned there was a kind of massive smear campaign against CND attempting to suggest. So I think CND was sort of equated with communist neutralists and defeatists and so on. So really unacceptable practice in our democracy. It seems to me that there must have been a political motivation, given there was no objective reason from the kind of stated reasons as to why CND was under surveillance, and that it should continue to 86, and even perhaps considered in 87 seems to me to be quite shocking. But I suppose the most concerning matter is the kind of attacks on CND in 1983 and the attempts to undermine its absolutely legitimate role in raising public awareness about a government policy which was based on weapons of mass destruction, which were already at that point supposed to be disarmed under international law.
Just turning the focus back onto this special demonstration squad, what do you think of the suggestions that we've just seen on behalf of the SDS that an infiltration into CND might continue or might have been merited once Tim Spence's deployment came to an end?
Well, it seems absurd.
So I have a little more left on some discrete subject matters. I don't think I'd be able to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes. Would that be a convenient moment?
You want to break now rather than in 5 minutes' time?
Yes.
Yes, certainly it would be. In which case we will start at 1:55.
Thank you very much.